Hello, I'm Annie Larkin, Vice President and Director of Community Engagement of the Amerind Museum. Welcome to Prehistoric Moche Politics and Food along Peru's North Coast with Dr. George Wolf Gumerman. Before we begin the program today, I want to acknowledge that Amerind is located in southeastern Arizona, on lands where O'odham, Hopi, Oshwe, Yoeme, and Apache families lived for untold generations, and whose wisdom and traditions live on today in vibrant communities. We are grateful for what all of these communities, rich in history, have to teach us. Thank you to our program sponsor, Desert Diamond Casinos, as well as our members and donors who enable Amerind to provide free online programming and to fulfill Amerind's mission to foster and promote the knowledge and understanding of the Native peoples of the Americas through research, education, conservation, and community engagement. To learn how you can assist Amerind in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit amerind.org. On Saturday, August 6th at 11 a.m., Amerind will host the free online lecture, Contextualizing Old Museum Collections, the Case of the Obsidian Mirrors at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, with Drs. Maria Martinez and Michael Brandel. Please visit the events section of Amerind's Facebook page or website amerind.org for registration details. Then on Saturday, August 13th at 11 a.m., Amerind will host the free online children's book reading with author Violet Duncan. Please visit the events section of Amerind's Facebook page or website amerind.org for registration details. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Dr. George Wolf Gumerman was the founding dean of the Honors College and Professor Emeritus of Anthropology at Northern Arizona University. Wolf has a strong interest in food and culture stemming from his 20 years of research on the north coast of Peru and from his interest in sustainable food systems. Wolf often applies archaeological research to broader societal concerns, including collaborating with the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office to promote cultural preservation. Using archaeology and elder knowledge, he worked to connect Hopi youth with their past. The collaboration produced 4 films and a museum exhibit that present the youth's perspective on Hopi culture and history. He is co-founder and past co-editor of the journal Heritage Management, and he publishes primarily on the topics related to prehistoric foodways. Wolf has taught a range of interactive courses on composition and literature, archaeology, theory, human evolution, and food and culture. He is a board member for the Friends of the Flagstaff Area National Monuments and also for the Arizona chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And if you would like to ask Wolf any questions during the program today, please type them in the Q&A chat box. We'll gather those questions to share with him after his presentation. Also, a link to today's recording will be sent to all of our Zoom registrants later today. And with that, I'd like to welcome you, Wolf. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Annie. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm in beautiful Flagstaff, probably a little bit cooler than down there in the Dragoons, but it's great to be here, and it's especially a pleasure to present for the Amerind because my illustrious father, also George Gumerman III, was a board member for I think about 20 years at the Amerind. So it's a special opportunity for me today. Today I'd like to focus on a culture that I've worked with for quite some time, the Moche, and do this through foodways. And if I can get my slides to move here. Thank you, sorry. Most people, when they think of archaeology in Peru, really think of the Inca. I mean, they're really the most well-known. People go to Peru, they travel to Machu Picchu. Although I did talk to friend the other day who was going to Peru, and he said, "Is it really worth going to Machu Picchu?" And I said, "Oh yeah, it's for sure. I've gone maybe 6 times, and every time it's just always a wonder." So if you do travel to Peru, make sure you do go to Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu, of course, probably the most famous archaeological site in South America, but was home to the Inca, which is actually a quite late civilization, state society in Peru. They're well known for their amazing stonework. This is the site of Sacsayhuaman near Cusco, which was the capital of the Inca Empire. Sacsayhuaman, some of these stones are tons in size or weight, but intricately formed and made. So really quite a spectacular archaeology. My work, however, was on the coast of Peru, particularly the north coast of Peru. This is the town of Huanchaco, just outside of the city of Trujillo. Wonderful little fishing village. It's also a tourist spot for Peruvians. It's not so much a tourist spot for foreign tourists, but I urge you not just to go to Cusco and Machu Picchu if you head down to Peru, but go to the north coast. There's lots of amazing archaeology, as you'll see today, as well as amazing little villages such as Huanchaco. Just really a special place in my mind. We typically would rent a house here, have our lab in a different house, or sometimes the same house, but just an amazing little place with lots of fine people, and especially great seafood. I grew up in the Midwest, never really, and the Midwest and also the Southwest, so never really got into seafood until I went to South America, both Ecuador, the coast of Ecuador, and the coast of Peru. Seafood's just amazing. So get down there, make sure you go to the North Coast as well. I just wanted to show this shot. This is just near the site or the village of Huanchaco. These are contemporary fishing boats. So the Peruvians use these reed boats to fish with currently. And what's interesting is these are, there's depictions of similar boats used prehistorically. So technologically, using many of the same kinds of techniques. I'm going to focus our talk today on the Moche. Again, not as well known as the Inca, but quite well known because of they're considered master craftsmen. A lot of National Geographic articles about Moche. Their craftsmanship is spectacular, especially well known for their pottery vessels, such as the vessel here on the right. These are actually mold made, so they're molds and the clay pressed into the molds and form these pottery vessels. They're also really well known for their kind of treasures, the treasures of the Moche, everything from gold and silver. I'll show you a number of these types of treasures today, but this gold mask with lapis eyes, just spectacular types of work. I also have a great deal of monumental architecture. This is one of the sites I worked on at El Brujo. It's the Cal Viejo monument, and it's the architecture. It's made out of solid adobe bricks. Later cultures along the coast, such as the Chimu, typically used case and fill. So they would build a wall and then fill in between the walls with garbage, dirt, whatever, to build that monumental structure. These Moche typically made their monumental architecture with solid adobe bricks. So millions of adobe bricks going into the production of these types of monuments. And you can see also The landscape, you might be wondering if you're not familiar with this area. It is one of the driest deserts in the world. In the kind of hazy background there, you can see a river valley that is irrigated. So you do get irrigation and water coming down from the Andes down to the coast. Those were irrigated prehistorically, and they're currently irrigated as well. You also see it looks like kind of a moon crater. It's all looting. So because of those treasures, there's been a lot of extensive looting in the areas. We use that to our advantage, as I'll show you later. I mean, obviously it's not good, but it's there. We use it kind of as test beds to kind of get a sense of what's there. We clean those out, but it gives us a sense of that. Even though it's super destructive, we're able to really use that to our advantages. Again, some of that craftsmanship. There's murals and friezes. Again, you can see the incredible preservation of the architecture, these friezes, the colors. They have been restored, but they're natural and really vibrant murals and friezes that we get a lot of information about the Moche from that great preservation. Again, some of that master craftsmanship, and you can kind of get a sense of, as we go through this, you'll see some images of death and warfare. And I believe that Moche culture, at least partially, was consumed by death, that it really revolved around death and human sacrifice. At least that's kind of what some of the art and murals, pottery vessels tell us. This is a warrior back flap. It was found at Sipan. It says the decapitator deity has got a knife in one hand, a decapitated head in another. You'll see another image of that later on. You can see a similar back flap on this warrior here. It's obviously a little bit different, doesn't have that decapitator deity on it, but it's got prisoner, war club, shield, war club and shield, and another warrior here, so taking prisoners. And then again, here's a flayed individual in a ceramic pottery vessel playing a drum. So getting the sense that warfare, death, human sacrifice is really an important component of part of their culture. Frieze at El Brujo, in that huge mound that I showed you with that decapitated head. There's even difficult to see, but there's even kind of graffiti. I don't know if that's really the right term, but decapitated heads kind of etched into the mural, to the frieze there. This is an amazing ear spool of a warrior. Found it's in situ. It's in a burial in Sipan, again a famous archaeological site north of where I did most of my work, but was able to visit this site several times. But this ear spool, think about it. I mean, here he's wearing an ear spool right there. It's about maybe 2.5, 3 inches across from here to here. But again, a warrior, his war club. You can take that war club right out of his hands. He's got a necklace of owl heads. Here's the back flap again. Look at that nose ornament. I think body piercing seems to be pretty common these days. I've always thought maybe it'd be good to market, kind of some kind of replicas of Moche nose rings. Might really take on, and maybe I could fund the Amerind for years on that. Also notice this headdress. Also other individuals besides this ear spool. So just amazing, now hopefully you're getting a sense of why we think of them as master craftsmen. I want to focus today kind of on Moche political organization and trying to use food to help us understand how the Moche were organized, in what way. Some people would argue that the Moche were a unified state with a capital at the Moche pyramids. I'll talk about that site in a little bit. Some people might argue they're city-states. I think we've kind of moved away from them being referred to as a unified state. Maybe they're more like city-states. Kind of think about the city-states of Greek city-states, Athens and Sparta, fighting with each other. A lot of the Moche art that we see, they're Moche fighting Moche. It's not Moche fighting, you know, a highland group or Moche fighting a southern group. It really seems that they're fighting within themselves. In reality, this is a simplification, a kind of duality. Thinking about it as a unified state or a city-state, it's probably multiple types of things, and something maybe in between, and probably change through time. If you think about it, you know, the Moche date from 8200 to 800, so about 600 years. It's a long time. I mean, think about our country. It's only really a little over 200 years old, our form of government. You know, and that's, you know, obviously things have changed and are changing as we speak. So I'm sure things changed and we're in flux. They probably were not a unified state. And I think most people would agree with that. Maybe there were city-states at some times, maybe they were regional organizations that really were trying to take control over other regions. So it's really, I kind of look at this in this talk as a simplified duality in terms of, you know, was it a unified state or was it a city-state? Well, it might not have been either, but we're going to use food to kind of try and tease out what that might have really looked like. And how do we look at food? I mean, think about food. It's incredibly social. You know, you might have some friends over for dinner. It's a social event. You might have a meeting. Do you serve food at that meeting? Yeah, usually. What kind of food do you serve? Who prepared that food? You know, food is a reflection of society. It really reflects the social organization. It reflects how people behave. And you can look at everything from food production. How is food produced? How is food distributed? You know, how do people get food? Most of us don't grow our own food. We might have a little garden that supplements our food, but the majority of us, at least here in the US, I know we have people from all over the world, but most of us get our food from the supermarket. You know, where does that food from? It comes from industrialized agriculture. Some of it comes from Peru. Our asparagus often comes from the north coast of Peru. There's huge production of asparagus on the north coast of Peru. So really thinking about food can tell us a lot about society and how it's organized. Again, thinking about the US food system, it's heavily bureaucratized. We have a Department of Agriculture, a US government agency that oversees our food production. Yes, we might grow some of our own food. Yes, we might go to our supermarket to get some of our food, but much of our food is subsidized. You know, our government, our taxes often go towards producing pork or producing corn that we don't eat, but the cows eat, and then we eat the cows. And it's very few of these large-scale farms that provide the majority of food that we consume. So think about food and when you're eating it, and where does that come from? You know, even you go to a restaurant, do those restaurateurs grow their own food? No, you know, they're getting their food from Cisco. You know, I know some restaurants that I try and frequent that get their food from the farmer's market, but majority of food that we eat is distributed by corporations. It's heavily bureaucratized. So how can we look at food prehistorically to get at what types of production and distribution those societies used, and what does that tell us about the society? To look at that, I want to look at Inca foodways, because we know a lot about Inca foodways, and then I'll compare and contrast that in a little bit with Moche foodways. The Inca foodways Inca food system was heavily centralized. The Inca controlled production and distribution of much of that food. We know that because researchers such as Christine Hastorf, Timothy Earle compared pre-Inca food systems to Inca food systems in similar sites. And what they found was that the food system became centralized, that the Inca used staples to finance their state activity. So staple finance, it's using staple goods such as corn to finance corn and potatoes to finance state activities such as large-scale feasts. We know this partially because of the chronicles. So the Spanish chronicled the Inca conquest and talked about that. We know it also through archaeology, but the Inca had administrative centers throughout the state society. And these administrative centers were often areas for large-scale feasts. And so they had corvée labor that might build the roadways, labor to build Machu Picchu, labor that might build, that grow crops, labor that served in the armies. These individuals were feasted. It was kind of a way of giving back to the laborers. And it actually made the system work. And typically the laborers were male. Typically we tend to realize that the females were the one that produced a lot of the food and drink for these large scale feasts. But it was something that was really important to the Inca, and it made their culture succeed in a large scale. These large scale feasts were functioned to reciprocate those labor activities. We also see expansive storage at many of these administrative centers. So hundreds, sometimes thousands of storerooms that were massive on scale. And what were they storing in there? Typically corn that then they would produce that then they would make into maize beer or chicha. And this chicha was served at these large scale feasts. So large storage features that we see throughout the Inca Empire. And we also see a lack of diversity in terms of the types of food that are available. So pre-Inca sites would often have a diverse array of foods in those sites. And then we get to the Inca then maybe took over that region, took over that site, and we see that the number of different species really are restricted. They're essentially telling their workforce, you're going to grow corn so that we can make maize beer and reciprocate at these large scale feeds. Cuts of meat as well. So we're seeing fewer cuts of meat, fewer animals that are being used once we see the empire expanding. And think about it, if we go to a grocery store, you might see a wide array of foods in that grocery store, but because of it's a centralized system, you really get the same cuts of meat from that butcher as you do at one grocery store, as you go to the next grocery store, as you go to your local butcher. Now, if I hunt a deer and I butcher that deer, my meat cuts of meat are going to look very different. I'm going to use different cuts of meat as well than that centralized food distribution system. So this is kind of similar in a sense to what we saw with the Inca. Very centralized. They're using a few staples because they can grow a lot of it. It's very productive. They can feed a lot of people. Big storage areas and lack of diversity. So now let's move to the Moche and see how they might compare with the Inca. I've worked in the north coast of Peru. It's been a while since I've worked there, but worked there for about 20 years and worked on a variety of sites from my dissertation, which was dissertation work, which was up further north. I won't be talking about that today. It was really with a different culture, the Chimu. I also worked at El Brujo. I mentioned Huanchaco. Huanchaco, that beach town, is located around in here. Lima, to the farther south, kind of central coast. I'll talk about the Moche pyramids. They kind of have a number of different names. The Moche capital, it's often referred to, Waka del Sol and Waka de la Luna, basically mound of the sun and mound of the moon. I'll also talk about Galindo, which is often referred to as a late Moche capital. And then also some farming villages up the Moche Valley, Santa Rosa, Catwalk, and Ciudad de Dios. So that kind of gives you a sense of the sites I'll be talking about today and the location of them. Santa Rosa, Catwalk. So the first site I'd like to talk about. It's an early Moche site, and this is important because we're kind of comparing sites that span the Moche occupation or the Moche time period. But Moche 1, so early Moche, it's made up of a number of I think over 100 small little commoner households. So, you know, a room with a bench and a little hearth, another room, a bench and a little hearth, households that were agricultural laborers. So they were rural agriculturalists. And we know that because we found a lot of agricultural hoes at the site. But a wonderful site. I do want to point out this was one of our first sites that we worked at, and we had a Jeep Wagoneer. We called it La Bestia, the beast. We're always continually working on it. And notice it's on a hill, because we had to kind of get it push started to get it started there when we went home for the day. What we see, as I mentioned, at Santa Rosa Catwalk are small amorphous hearths or fire pits, essentially. A hearth is a fire pit where they would cook, a family might live in here. Here's a room here with a bench that they might sit on and sleep on, a couple of hearths that they would cook their family meals on. So household based, they're not cooking for a large number of people. That we might see. We also get a large number of jars, so they're storing food and drink in jars, but nothing massive in terms of scale. So really quite small scale. If we look at the food remains from the site, we see not a lot of animal remains, fauna. We do have some, but not a lot. But a diverse array of botanical materials, and really dominated by corn, maize, and common beans, or Phaseolus vulgaris. I just want to point out this is really probably a lima bean, anthropomorphized lima bean. It's also a warrior. He's probably chewing coca, gourd bowl with lime. And a spatula to put the coca or to activate the coca. But again, you see the back flaps, the headdress, and then the shield and club. So, not something you would find. You wouldn't find this kind of image at Santa Rosa Catwalk, because it was a commoner site. This kind of image was on a beautiful elite ceramic vessel. Another site I want to compare is Ciudad de Dios, near there. It's also a rural farming village, but it's a late period farming village. So it dates to the later end of the Moche occupation. It's probably dominated by agricultural labor. It has, here's a a couple of the stone hose that I mentioned that we also found at Santa Rosa Catwalk. It's also located along an irrigation canal, a prehistoric irrigation canal. So we assume that the inhabitants of this site were primarily agricultural laborers. There's also an abundance of groundstone. Some of this groundstone is quite large. Here's one of the, over a meter in size sometimes, one of the large stone that was used kind of as a base to grind, and then the chunga is kind of a big rocking stone would have ground, for instance, sprouted maize kernels, roughly ground to help make that chicha or maize beer. There is an elite area of the site and kind of more commoner area of the site. We know that because of the architecture was nicer, nice well-plastered floors. We also found ceramic fragments of fine ceramic Moche ceramic wares. And they're probably doing feasting in these sites because of the larger groundstone making more materials. And we assume that these elite people are feasting the commoners in the area in return for their agricultural labor. Another site that I want to compare and contrast is Waka del Sol and Waka de la Luna, again often referred to as the Moche capital. This is Waka del Sol, again just massive with thousands or hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of adobe bricks in there. This is Waka de la Luna. Some people often think, oh, is that a pyramid? No, that's a stone cerro or mountain in the background, but probably very important to the Moche people. You also see some storage features here in the foreground. I'll talk about those here in a minute, but just kind of keep that in mind. These are some of the storage features, which would have been, much smaller than the Inca storage features I mentioned earlier. What's interesting is that there's a kind of an area that's often referred to as the urban zone between the Waka del Sol and Waka de la Luna. This urban zone kind of is a network of compounds, alleys, plazas, and it appears that this urban zone was served multiple purposes. Some of it was undoubtedly administrative. Administrators were in there. Some were buried in there. There's also a lot of evidence for craft production in some of these areas, metal production, bead production, and so forth. And I believe ceramic production, but I'm not quite sure on that. People living and working at these spaces as well. What's interesting about the urban zone is there's some areas that we see a lot of big hearths. Compare this hearth here, it's meters long, kind of 2 rows of adobe, the firebox would have been in between, to that small amorphous hearth I showed you at Santa Rosa Catwalk. So big hearths, also big pots. So we have a number of these big pots showing up in the urban zone, and they're probably preparing chicha, probably other goods as well, but probably preparing chicha for feasting activities to reciprocate the labor of the people working in these compounds. Another site that I worked out, I did some work at Waka del Sol and Waka de la Luna, but much of that work was done with other folks. I did work a little bit at Galindo with Gregory Lockhart, did his dissertation there. Again, often referred to as Late Moche Capital. I might keep that capital in quotes, kind of loosely, simplistically using those kinds of terms. Households really dominate the architecture. Oops, sorry, go back. And we see a diversity of food remains. So not really like we saw at Waka del Sol and Waka de la Luna with the urban zone, but really households dispersed within these massive city walls, and then a diversity of food remains. We have a lack of data on feasting, although we do find some large groundstone materials, but again, the hearths are these small amorphous hearths, and we really only excavated a small portion of the site. It had been excavated earlier, but we really, our findings at the site was really a lack of data for feasting. And now I want to talk about El Brujo. It's the site I worked on most recently. An amazing site. I really feel I have it was a privilege to be able to work there. It was really a privilege to be able to work in Peru at all. But El Brujo, it's quite fascinating. This is an air photo. You see the waves coming in. The river valley, irrigated today, would have been irrigated prehistorically. The one mound that I showed earlier was off over here. Is another large mound. These are modern houses, so you get a sense of the scale. I mean, it's massive. What's also interesting about it is it dates from all the way from the pre-ceramic to the colonial. There's a colonial church on there. And so it's really this long period of occupation. And it also has archaeological history. Junius Bird defined the pre-ceramic in the 1940s at this site down around this area here. So it's really a pleasure to be able to work there. You can see the Waka del Viejo, Peruvians doing a lot of work here, and we kind of focused our excavations in an area that we thought was more residential. Here's the area again. As we're starting to clean it, you can see we've cleaned out a lot of the looting pits to kind of give us a sense of what's below the surface. So we clean out those looting pits, work around them, be able to, here's a floor, and then kind of go in between them, excavate in between the looting pits to hopefully find areas that weren't disturbed by looting. So those looting pits afforded us a little sense of kind of peek at what might lay below the surface. I'd like to show this photo of my son and I excavating. So there is a George V out there. He's not an archaeologist, thankfully, but was a wonderful addition to our team. We called the area Las Tinajas because we found a lot of these large ceramic vessels that are referred to as tinajas. There was a domestic platform with ramps leading up to it. You can see one individual walking up that ramp. Again, a lot of the looting holes, but walls, a ramp leading up to the platform. Kind of the domestic platform was off to the west, I believe. We had cemeteries around there, again, probably why all the looting, and cemeteries within the platform itself. So here's one burial had been looted, there was nothing in it, but gives you a sense of the platform and the burials that were in there. And then again, some of the tinajas that we located. One thing that people always ask me, what's the coolest thing you ever found? And I think it's probably this cache of musical instruments. Flor Diaz excavating here, again, looting hole. Thankfully, the looters missed this cache of musical instruments as whistles. I'll show you this whistle here in a little bit. This is the back of it. Blow through here and it resonates. There's a little ceramic ball in there. Here's a feline trumpet. Here's another trumpet here as well. And here's I go back if I can, yeah. It's really salt encrusted. You can see the back of this trumpet here, because we're so close to the ocean, you get this fog and it kind of encrusts salt through everything. So we ended up having to take these back to the lab, soak them in a bucket of water to draw the salts out of them, change the water. And I pulled out the whistle. Here's the whistle here. There's some ear spools. And pulled out the whistle, looked at it, pulled out the salt starting to come off of it. And I'm looking at these two and I went, wow, these are the same individual. They're not the same mold, but look, they got the same necklace, same kind of ear spool, same headdress, the spirals there. This guy, obviously a warrior, same guy, obviously a warrior. He's got his war club and shield. And I'm looking at this, the trumpet here, you would blow through here, it resonates out through here. I'm looking at the trumpet and going, where's his arms? I turned him over, he's a prisoner. So again, that theme of warfare and human sacrifice coming out throughout the Moche world. But his hands tied in the back. I tried to find this individual, see if I could find him in other depictions. Never was able to. Might have been a local type of warrior. So was never able to kind of identify him as we do on some of the really important folks in Moche society. We see him depicted multiple times and in multiple different themes. So if we look at the funerary feasting compound, we see massive hearths there. So these hearths are sometimes more than 4 meters long. Several of them are a couple meters long. Again, you have the rows of adobes with the firebox in between. And again, seeing looting holes, but massive. What's also interesting is that the layer of ash and charcoal that forms in there had layers of salitre, or salt encrusted soil. So we know that they were open for some period of time. You get that ocean fog loaded with salts, forms that hard pan essentially. Then they would build another fire on top of that after some period of time. And we assume that they were cooking large amounts of food because of the size of these massive hearths for feasting funeral feasts. Here's a picture of a small scale, one of the community member using a similar system, but on a smaller scale, with the firebox resting pots in between. We assume it was very similar for the Moche. Also a lot of tinajas. So we find that a number of these tinajas throughout the funerary compound, as well as outside the compound. Probably things like this used for storing liquids, things like this probably for storing non-liquids, although they're set into the floor, so could have been used really for anything. Other sites, it's another San Jose de Moro, a little farther north, with a lot of high class, upper class burials, also have similar types of tinajas. What was the Moche diet like? If we look at all these different sites and kind of compare and contrast those or kind of combine them, we see that Moche diet was very diverse. Over 203 total species of plants and animals represented. Animals, marine and terrestrial, 133 species. So everything from shellfish to lots of different species of fish, to marine mammals, to birds. We even found some penguins, penguin wings. At first we looked at it and it's well preserved, and it's like, what is this? And it happened to be a Humboldt penguin. Botanical remains over 70 species. So llama probably dominated the faunal assemblage. I also have a lot of guinea pig. Sorry about this picture. Hopefully not too many vegetarians on here, but I do love guinea pig. Guinea pig often currently served as it's a tourist attraction, but in Peruvian culture, it's really a special food, often served at birthdays and parties and things like that. Very tasty. Does not taste like chicken, maybe a little bit more like duck. This is Donex, one of the more common shellfish that we found at the site. This is in a local market. If we look at botanical remains, everything from corn. Again, you can see this is a prehistoric corn cob. Amazing preservation because of that dry north coast of Peru. Peanuts, Ericus hypogaea, a variety of fruits, everything from squash to husk tomatoes to guava, so tree fruits as well. A lot of different wild herbs, some probably medicinal, some used as tea, some as seasonings, and so forth. I just love this shot of peanuts, just actually the back of a truck just full of peanuts. Chili peppers, quite common, ají amarillo. It's becoming common here in the States now. We found a lot of chilies, chili pepper seeds, which anybody has worked on roasting chilies knows that there are often a lot of seeds in those. So it's not surprising that we would find a lot of those seeds. So what was Moche Foodways? What does it really tell us about Moche Society? I think if we look at this combination of archaeological sites, everything from a rural small farming village to Moche capitals, we see that it seems to be on a small scale. Nothing really like that large scale we saw with the Inca Empire. Households, or maybe extended households, maybe communities, they're in control of food production and preparation. If the state, if it was centralized and there was a lot of control from a centralized authority over food production and preparation, I think we'd see a lot different system. We would see that we would see a lot less diversity than what we see. It'd be similar in a sense to what we see with the Inca Empire. Probably relative independence of households and communities. Again, this variation, the diversity that we see would suggest that independence. And this again would suggest a decentralized sociopolitical organization rather than something like the Inca state where we're seeing very centralized production and consumption. We're not seeing massive storage features. We're not seeing a reduction, a narrowing of the diversity of foods that are produced. Even though we see some feasting and some feasting activities, it's probably more on the community level or maybe a lineage level rather than large-scale state-sponsored bureaucracy. Well, I'd like to thank you for attending today. I'd especially like to thank the Amerind Foundation, but I'd also like to thank the Institute of National Culture of Peru and the people of Peru for really allowing me to work in the region. I'm sure I'm going to miss some folks, but I do want to thank a lot of the folks that have helped me with my research, including folks like Doug Mahaffey, James Tate, Kendall Campbell, Ian Huff, Carrie Thompson, Gail Reiser, all students of mine, former students of mine, that without them would never have been able to present the material that I presented to you today. I'd also like to thank colleagues that I collaborated with, Brian Billman, Greg Lockhart, and especially my Peruvian colleagues, Cesar Galvez, Jesus Briseño, and Regalo Franco. So thank you very much. And now I'd like to bring back Annie and open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Wolf. That was fantastic. We do have several questions. Our first is from someone who says hello to you, so you may know them. I'm John Cater or John Catter. He says, Dr. Gumerman, what are the major or minor developments and understandings of the Moche since the 1980s when he was studying them?
Well, that's a difficult question because I really haven't worked in the area since when I became an administrator at Northern Arizona University. I kind of couldn't spend 3 months of the year down in Peru, but I'd say that there's I would suggest that there's ongoing more care in terms of looking at household activities and contextual archaeology. So in the past and still today, I mean, there's a huge fascination with, and kind of call it temples and tomb archaeology, really going for the treasures, and it's understandable, it's the art and ceramics and gold work are amazing. But we kind of lacked an idea of, what did people really eat, and techniques that are using fine screens. Some archaeology didn't even use screens, except when they got into burials so that they could find little, some of those small beads. So using of screens, methods that draw find small microscopic seeds out of the soil. I think some of the techniques have really advanced, and it's advancing our understanding. So thank you for that question, and I'd say it's advancing nicely.
The next question is, at one time it was thought that Moche was a loose grouping of social groups divided by valley, as indicated by distinctive effigy pots, thought to represent leaders of each valley. Does this still stand?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably, I think my data that I presented today would suggest more of a similar type of organization as you suggested, that valleys might have controlled the region, rather than the capital at Waka del Sol and Waka de Luna, controlling the wide area. It would also indicate some of that, could be fighting between valleys. So I would suggest yes. I would also say that, again, we're looking at a long period of time, and that could have changed where, we might have had polities spanning a couple valleys at some periods of times. Then, maybe there was warfare and it might have split, or maybe, it kind of could have come back and forth. So excellent question. And I'd say it's continually really changing, but it's important to kind of think that we're looking at a long period of time, and that could fluctuate throughout time.
Is there any recent research on the use of sweet potatoes and the DNA links between Western Pacific Islands and Northwest South American tribes?
Well, interesting questions, and that's one that I haven't seen any evidence for. There's often been talk about, origins of, up in Ecuador, Valdivia, origins coming in pre-Valdivia, really coming from the Pacific. I would argue there's not a lot of evidence for that. I think some of it's coincidental. There might have been some contact, you probably can't rule it out, but I'd say it was more, I think the evidence would suggest in situ development. I don't think I've ever seen any prehistoric sweet potatoes along the coast of Peru, and not a lot of potatoes along the coast either. I mean, a lot in the highlands, especially pre-Inca and contemporary, but haven't seen that evidence. But interesting question. I'll have to look into that more.
You mentioned irrigation canals. Anything like Hohokam canals in scale and technology?
I don't know a lot. I should know more about Hohokam canals. I know my father worked on some of those. The irrigation canals varied through time. There were later post-Moche, so after Moche, excuse me, Chimu Empire actually had intervalley canals, huge, massive canals, and they're really kind of redoing that today, where they've got some canals going from valley to valley and just opening up wide areas of irrigation. So I'd say the canals are probably on a much larger scale than Hohokam, but again, I don't know a lot about the Hohokam, but major canal systems, and some of these larger sites like Galindo might have been kind of control point for some of the irrigation canals throughout the valley. Those large, massive kind of city walls, there might have been fighting over some of the irrigation types of systems.
You mentioned Coca use. Todd Griffin, he says he thinks of Coca as a product of the highlands. And was it common on the coast?
I don't think I ever found Coca seeds or Coca. It wasn't common, but I'm sure it was there. I mean, we see the depictions in the pottery vessels and the line drawings on pottery vessels of that. But it's really, and it's not grown in the highlands. It's grown lower elevations, jungle typically. It's an area I'm not too familiar with because we didn't find much of it, if any at all. So, but it's typically grown at a lower elevation, even though, the Inca at the high elevations were consuming it on a regular basis.
How much of the labor that you mentioned can be attributed to captives?
No idea. I would imagine not a lot. Maybe with the Inca, probably much more. So the Inca would conquer a region. They were kind of like the Romans in that they spread really quickly. They spread the Inca language, Quechua. It's kind of the lingua franca. And there might have been, once they conquered a region, subjugated those people, put them into service. Along the coast, we don't have that kind of evidence. We do have evidence of sacrificial victims. So I think a lot of warriors were sacrificed. Waka del Sol and, well, actually in Waka de la Luna, there was a large area of human sacrifice. And these appeared to be youngish males, often with healed wounds, often forearms, probably from battle, and they were mutilated, left out to, for vultures to come and consume on them. It's really quite brutal. So I would imagine they might not have been subjugated in terms of labor. I think it was more of community-based type of labor, especially at these communities like Santa Rosa, Catwalk, and Ciudad de Dios.
And Kathy Costin has a question next. She says, hello and wonderful talk. She knows that the talk was about food, but would like to know if you found any remains of plants with psychoactive properties.
Hi, Kathy. Good to hear from you. A long time. Let's see. That's a good question. And I can't think of it, I'm mostly focusing on food, but, we look at all the plant materials. So I'm sure there must have been some, but I can't think of any off the hand. Feel free to email me. I'd be glad to look through some of the data and see if I could find anything, but can't think of any off the top of my head.
I think this will probably be our last question. Regarding the reed boats, is it known how far west from the coast they might have gone, as well as north and south along the coast? And do you think if any archaeologists have done any comparative studies of reed boats along the Pacific coast and of the Western Hemisphere? Have they?
Well, interesting question. Kind of gets me thinking. And, I think some of the depictions of boats, and you see different kinds of depictions. Some almost have outriggers on them, so they might have gone out further. So they might have gone out a greater distance. It's possible, but I think if we look, I think most of it was probably not, it was fairly near shore. Currently, the fishermen are, they don't go out that far. although I've gone out on those boats and they use split cane, so large cane like that, round, and they'd split it, use that as a paddle, or they still use it today. I tried doing that, I couldn't get anywhere. But they're placing nets out there, and then they'll come back in, they'll kind of ride the waves in, then go back out, and you can see them out there. You know, they're not too far out, so I would imagine a lot of the fishing wasn't too far out. Would have to look at some of the fish remains and kind of get a sense of what types of species there are, and if you know, if a lot of those fish are deep water versus more shallow water, might give us some indication of that. But interesting question. As far as north and south, I imagine they could go a ways, but I would bet, especially if, you know, they're at war, you know, they're probably not going too far out north and south.
Thank you so much for your time today, Wolf. We truly appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
And thanks to our audience for joining us. We hope to see you again on August 6th for our next Amerind online program. Until then, take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.